Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome and a good evening to you, wherever you are watching this from. If you are live, please drop us a hello. This is your friend Adeel Rizvi for this latest episode of live webinar today that we are talking about. And today's topic is in continuation of last week's topic. So, last week we talked about how you can go about and find the high growth suburbs where potentially you can invest today and make 100 grand over the next 12 months. Today, we are talking about once you have found that right suburb, how can you go about and find the right property in that area? So, we'll be going through a lot of material today. If you have joined us now, or if you're watching a recording, please drop us a hello, say hi, drop us a comment. We want to know that you are here and ask questions. The most important bit, ask questions at any point of time. I would love to take your questions online and would try my best to answer them during the call itself. So let's get started with today's session, guys. And I will be sharing my slide pack with you. So again, right, it's all about, let me go to the beginning. We'll be talking about a lot of stuff. And again, if you have any personal situation that you want to talk about, if you don't want to share your questions in public, more than happy to have a chat directly, one on one as well. Here's the QR code. Book in a time with myself, and I'm more than happy to take your questions offline. And if you can ask something in public, that's even better, right? So let's get started, guys. And I will go through a very, first of all, before anything else, we will have a disclaimer. So again, whatever we are talking about today is purely generic in nature and does not take into account your specific and your personal situation. Whatever we talk about today, it's not a financial, legal, or any kind of tax advice. And please ensure that you seek your independent professional advice before you act on any information or that has been presented or discussed in today's webinar. And because the information may or may not be applicable to your personal circumstances. So please keep that in mind. This is a very open disclaimer. And moving ahead, we would like to talk about what we discussed last week, just so that we can connect very, very quickly. So last week we talked about why property markets go up in value. And the primary reason for that is the imbalance in supply and demand, which we are seeing across so many different markets across the country. Like every state has its own markets where supply and demand imbalance is there. And we need to keep finding those areas where the future supply is looking tight and the future demand is continuing to rise, which means that is where we are likely to have price growth. And that's where you make more growth than the average, right? So that's a simple principle. We talked about the average growth, and we also talked about that the average growth can be 6 to 7%, but we want to target areas which can give us 10, 15% or more growth in the first 3 to 4 years every single year, right? So those are the areas we are targeting. We ran the whole process, and the video, I've shared the YouTube link over here at the bottom. This is the link for the last week's video as to how you can find the growth suburbs. So you can always revisit it, and please provide your feedback on that if it makes sense, if it adds any value. And I've pasted that link over here again, and we will be sharing that link once again in the comments for this today's video as well, just so that you can reflect back to it, because today's webinar is in continuation of what we discussed last week, right? So it will make more sense if you watch that one first and then watch today's webinar. You can watch them separately as well, but if you really want to go out and buy the right property, you have to watch the last week's webinar first, which talks about how to find the right suburb, and then you jump on to today's webinar, where we will be talking about how you can find the right property asset, right? So continuing on, what are we going to be talking today? We need to be finding the right property. If you remember, it's a very well-known thing, get the worst property in the best street, right? Worst kind of property in the best suburb. Well, it's kind of true, but I would like to go a step ahead than that. Why do we really want to go for the worst possible property? Why can't we go and target a really good property, a very desirable property in that very hot and desirable suburb? So that's what we are focusing on, trying to find that really good, nice property, which is easily rentable, minimal maintenance, and just chucks along in the background and delivers rental income to you and just keeps growing in value as well without you having to do anything at all, right? So some of the criteria we'll be looking at we'll go through them one by one, but these are all the checks we'll be doing today, and I will run you through them very quickly. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try to make sure we wrap it up within 20-25 minutes, and then answer any of your questions as well. So the first important thing is we need to understand what social housing is. Now, social housing means the housing which is funded by the government for people who are making less money, who are making less income, or who don't even have an income source. Now, not all social housing is bad, or not all people who are on social housing, on Centrelink payments, are bad people. There are some very good people as well. Most of them are really nice people, right? But some of the times, in some cases, when people are on, and I discussed that last week as well, that why do we need to be away from the social housing? Because sometimes people who are on government income, not doing their own income, they are more likely to be in things and in some of the undesirable activities which may affect the local community. There are drugs issues around. Not saying that every social housing person is involved in drugs. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there is a likelihood that people who are not doing any work, who are not active in the community, they may fall victim to some of these things where that can be disruptive for their own life and for people who are living around them. So a lot of times when we talk about social housing areas, those are the areas where if you walk through them, if you drive past through those streets, you may see like really big grass growing, not well maintained front yards. You can see some road rage, some rough driving, some very really rough kind of a behavior you will witness over there. So we are just trying to stay away from those streets, right? Now, every suburb has some kind of social housing in Australia. 99% of suburbs have them. So we can't avoid a suburb, but we are trying to avoid the pocket from which there can be social housing, and we just need to stay away from there, right? So here I've taken an example. Let's say we have a property in a suburb called Crestmead. Now, I'm not saying that Crestmead is the right suburb to buy. We were buying in Crestmead 4 years ago. It's in Logan Council in Queensland, but it's not the right suburb at this point because it has had a lot of growth already in the last 3-4 years. But this is just for the sake of an example. If I have to buy 18 Limerick Drive Crestmead and I have to check social housing around it, I will first check what streets are around this particular street, right? And then I will go into, as a rule of thumb, if there are 1, 2, 3 social houses in a given street, it's still acceptable, right? Because there are 30, 40, 50 other houses which are not under social housing. So we will still take that, right? So what I will do is I will go into Core Logic. Now, I shared about this tool last week around. And on Core Logic, I will enter street name Limerick Drive Crestmead. I will not enter the house number. I will only enter the street. What this will do is, if you can see on the right-hand side image, it will show all the properties in a listed order, which will have the names of the owners. Now, look, if the names are appearing as Mr. John, Paul, Muhammad, whatever, right? If the property ownership is under an individual's name, most likely the property is owned by that particular family. Now, they may be living there or they may be renting it out. That's a later question. But if a property has an ownership where the title looks like a company name or looks like a state housing, that is where you have to investigate further. If it says state housing, definitely it's a housing commission. That's where you go and actually talk to the local property manager over there and ask them, these particular houses are looking like social housing. Are they really troublesome houses? Are they normal? A lot of times social housing will have no problems at all. They will be lovely people living a normal life, and there's no problem with that, right? So I've shared this example on the left-hand side where we have a property which is owned by a company. So once it is owned by a company, again, this can be owned through a trust structure. It can still be a private ownership through a trust, through a company, nothing to do with social housing, but it can be under social housing as well, potentially. So that's where you have to go and check the local property manager and say, this particular house that I found, which is number 16 in this case, is this does it involve any social housing or not? And they will give you the right feedback, right? So you always go back and check with the local property managers, not with the local selling agents, because their opinion may not be unbiased. They may be biased because they're looking to sell something to you. So that's where local property manager who have been working over there for the last 10, 20 years, they are the people you need to ask this question. If you can fly and visit those areas, even better, but not possible practically in all the cases. So that's why I'm giving you these tips, right? Now, what question do you need to ask for the social housing? Again, some things we have discussed over here. You can ask the local property manager, how far is the closest social housing? That is a very important question to ask. Because if you ask them the question, is there any social housing close by? And the definition of closeness can be different for them. So a social housing which is 2 doors away may not be closed for them. So they can simply say, no, there's no social housing, even though there was a social housing couple of doors down, right? So that's where your questions need to be very strategic and very accurate. You rather should be saying, how far is the closest social housing? That's what I do when I'm talking to real estate agents and getting more information. Also, I would ask them, is this like a quiet pocket of the suburb? Because invariably or indirectly, what I'm asking them is there any social housing or a rough pocket close by? So their answer will actually give me some more insights into this, right? Now, if you see over here, this particular one, moving further from here, the next thing we need to identify is busy roads. Now, the reason we don't want to buy on busy roads is because the property is hard to rent out. If it's a busy road right next to it, where zone is like 70, 80 Ks, and it's a fast moving road connecting two different suburbs, it can be noisy, it can have problems in renting it out because people want to live in quiet houses, in quiet neighborhoods, right? So what do you do in this case is, what I did was that I first did a Google search quickly. I checked for Limerick Drive, same example as last time, and I said it is connected to two different roads. One is Trelson Drive, which is a double road, as you can see over here on the mouse, and second thing is the Brown Plains Road, which is actually a main road from right to left on your screen, which connects Waterford suburb with Brown Plains in the Logan Council. Now, these two are really busy roads from the looks of it because they are wide roads and big roads, but apparently Limerick Drive itself looks less busier or more quieter, and that is what we want. So what I will do is I'll call the local property manager and I will be asking them, can you tell me at what times Limerick Drive really gets busy? Because if I ask them, is Limerick Drive a busy street? Again, the definition of busy for everyone is different, and they may be like, no, it's not busy, even though there may be queues for people around the school zones who are trying to get out of the street, right? Because there's a couple of busy roads around there. So if there's a set of lights just on the junction of Limerick Drive and Trelson Drive, that's where there may be a lot of traffic during the school zone potentially. So I would rather ask them at what time this gets busy, and that will give me the right feedback. Also, I can ask them, does it really get busy around school zones, around the evening or the morning business hours? And that will also give me some good insight. So asking the right question can really help you find and get the right information from the property managers. Once we have identified the busy road, now in this case, Limerick Drive is not a busy road. We know that because we have done that investigation. Now, also what we want to avoid is any property which is, of course, we are avoiding the main busy road, but we also need to make sure that the property is not backing onto a highway. It may be onto a street, the entrance may be on a street, but the backside should not be onto a highway because, again, there's a noise factor involved. So what we do over here is, this is an example from a suburb of Bradbury in Campbelltown, Sydney. And there's a property called, as an example that I've picked, it's number 2 Ash Place in Bradbury. And what it shows over here is that the entrance is from Ash Place, but on the other side, there's a highway running over here. If you look in Google Maps, the parkway, and this looks quite busy. So one way of checking for busy roads is that I actually did a street view of the parkway. And when I went to the street view, that is an image on the right hand side of your screen, and that shows the speed limit of 60. Now, speed limit of 60 can be a bit tricky because it may seem to be normal in a lot of cases, but for that kind of a speed limit, I would actually call the property manager again and ask them, this is a speed limit of 60. Does it really get busy? And how busy does it get? Does it usually have a lot of trucks and heavy transport going through there? Because if that's the case, then the early morning and late nights can be really noisy, which can make sleeping in that property in the quieter hours really difficult. So that's why that purchase can prove to be really bad if you're looking to invest, or even if you're looking to buy something to live in for yourself. These are the checks you can do in that particular scenario as well. So that's what I will be checking with the property manager, if it's really get noisy on that particular highway and what kind of traffic is flowing there. So I would definitely want to avoid that if their answer is that yes, it's a busy road and it can have some heavy traffic. Now, other things that we also need to check is, I think we are going well with time at this point of time, which is really good. So the other thing which is really important is flooding checks. Now, flooding is something we always hear about in the news, and Brisbane has flooded and Queensland has flooded. It's always a small part typically that floods, but that creates a lot of ripple effect. A lot of things happen in the media. A lot of times we have bought in suburbs where a couple of streets down it can be flooding, but that particular street has never flooded in the last 10, 20 years. The best way to check is call the local council, ask them the question, when was the last time this particular street flooded? Or when the last heavy rains happened, was there any water pooling in or around this particular street? Because these are the questions that you can check with the council. Once you get a response back from them, you double check that with the local property manager. A lot of times councils may not give you the straight answer. They will potentially refer you to the council maps. Every council maintains their own maps. They have their own interactive, a lot of them are interactive, like in Mackay, in Cairns, in Toowoomba, in Brisbane. A lot of councils have interactive maps where you can go yourself and check for the flood ratings. Again, be very careful. You cannot discount or disregard a whole suburb just because a couple of streets or 4 or 5 streets actually flooded over there. If you can identify a pocket which is high rise, where the land is at a higher level and the water does not come over there, does not really flood, that is still a good area to buy in. That is why you have to identify those pockets within those suburbs which are still good for buying. And that is where you have to rely on the council information, rely on the council maps, and cross check that information with the property manager. Again, if you have been able to visit those places like we do for our clients, or one of our team member does, it's nothing like it. I mean, it's cherry on top, it's icing on the cake. But if you can't do that all the time, at least check with the council, check with the local property manager, and cross validate that information, right? So that is really important. Another important factor that we need to check is for bushfire. Now, a lot of time people get confused with bushfire hazards, because we all remember the bushfires that happened in 2019. They were really devastating across the country, especially across New South Wales, and we have a lot of bushfire prone areas in Australia. So with bushfires, we have to make sure if the bushfire hazard is still applicable. We recently bought a property in which the bushfire hazard was at least 15 years old, and the council never updated that. And even though if it was a normal buyer who was just looking at the council records, for them it was still a bushfire prone area. So they would not have bought that particular property because it was right in the middle of the bushfire area. But because we were talking to the right town planners in the area, in the council, we were able to find that that information is quite old and not even applicable now. So a lot of times council records may not be updated. So you need to be careful as to what you rely on. That's why I would recommend, if you're checking with the council for the BEL ratings, which is the bushfire attack level, always cross-check that information with two other sources. One is the local property manager who has been working in that area for the last 10, 20 years, because they have seen the area develop during that time. They have seen area gone through a lot of changes. Plus, the other important thing is cross-check that information with the local insurance provider, because insurance is the key stakeholder over here. If you are buying a property which potentially has a bushfire hazard, and the insurance company also sees that as a hazard, they will not insure it. Or even if they do, they will charge a big premium for that. So if the insurance company comes back and says that we don't see that as a bushfire hazard, even though the council map is showing it, that is a very good indication that probably the council information is outdated, right? So don't just disregard properties because something is coming up in a council map or in council records, because sometimes they cannot be up to date as well. So be very careful when making that decision. Now, other items you can check, which can be done rather quickly, is don't buy across T intersections where there's a T intersection, because a lot of times it's a busy area, number one. The other thing is, if your ensuite is right at the front of the property, the window would be right facing the street or perpendicular to the street across the T intersection. So if there are any cars driving through there, the headlights would be a real problem for that ensuite through the window, especially at night time, especially in winters. So after 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m., you will have headlights seeing through your window all the time, especially if the ensuite is at the front of the property. So that's where T intersection is a no-go. And it's also busy, so people don't like to live or rent a T intersection house. Also becomes difficult to sell it in future as well, right? So again, I keep repeating, whenever you're buying an asset, always think and ask yourself, who will buy the same asset from you 20, 30, 40 years later? Because at some point you have to sell it, right? So it should always have that sellability attraction for future buyers. Now, the land or the house that you're buying should not have excessive slope. and it should be a rather flat land. How can you check that? You can check that on a paid tool. I discussed about that tool 𝐟𝐷𝐲𝐝 last week. You can check that in the webinar, or you can check on Google Earth as well, where you can check the terrains. If it's excessive slope, then there can be issues with drainage of water when it rains. Also, there can be issues when you're looking to build on that side in future. Let's say you want to knock it down and build a house, so the construction becomes really challenging, and the construction cost also goes up as well. If you're not planning to do any construction, even then the rainfall can be a problem. The rainwater can be an issue as well. So I would avoid excessive slopes. What I mean by excessive slope, if there's a lot of land, the back side of the lot is, let's say, at a certain height, and the front side is like 1 meter below that, that's kind of okay. But if it's like 2-3 meters below that, that's a big kind of a slope on a 400 square meter lot. So I would try to avoid that, right? Again, soil contamination is a problem in Australia, especially with asbestos and with dumping. I know a lot of soil contamination experts who talk about dumping, which have happened on sites. Or you may be looking to buy, let's say, a house on a piece of land which previously had a gas station on it, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there was a gas station. And then the council actually rezoned it from commercial to residential. And now the houses were built and you're buying it. So please don't buy anything on a contaminated piece of land. And how do you know that? You go back and again, you check with the local property manager first. Again, in this case, the experience of the property manager is essential. They should be working in that area for at least 10, 20, 30 years. Even if you're looking to buy a home for yourself to live in, you can still call the local property manager and ask them the question, was this area completely residential like 20, 30 years ago? Because the problem is, if it was not residential and if it was commercial, then I know situations where if the land is contaminated, the council may actually come and ask you to clean the whole land, or actually get rid of, like knock the house down, or do some measures to protect the people who are living in the house, because in some cases it can even be radioactive kind of material as well. So depending if it was asbestos or whether it was radioactive material, you can get into a lot of trouble with the council or with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority. So please be careful of buying any properties on potential contaminated lands as well. Again, we always want to buy properties in the beginning. Again, guys, if you have any questions at any point, if you are watching the recording, dump your questions in the comments. I would love to take them and I would answer them today. But if I can't answer them today, I will definitely take them in the next week's webinar. By the way, next week in webinar, we will be having a very special guest, and that guest will be talking about some very tax effective strategies. So stay tuned for that webinar. It will be really helpful if you are a property investor, a seasoned investor, or you're looking to become a property investor. So please do tune in next week, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. So we continue with our content for today. We want to buy houses with no immediate maintenance. That is where selecting the right building and pest inspectors really help, because they are the people who have the right experience to look at the property and pick up any defects. Or you can get a building and pest report and you can get it inspected or reviewed by a licensed builder. They can also give their input, and that way you can actually get it cross-checked, because if you buy something with a big building issue, that can become your problem very quickly. It will be your baby once you settle on the property, right? Or in some states, it can be your baby after just going unconditional on the contract as well. So that's where you need to be really careful, right? So again, the lots that you're buying, another important consideration is for the property, it should be a rectangular or a square lot. It should not like be a triangular lot or a trapezium lot, because those lots don't have much utility. You can't do much on those lots. A lot of the land is like kind of wasted. And trust me, you can get them cheaper as well. And there's a reason you can get them cheaper, because you will be selling them cheaper as well in future, because they just don't have that demand. And because they don't have demand, you will not get the right value for the same amount of land if it was a rectangular or a square lot. So just be careful of that as well, right? One very important consideration that really affects people in terms of their lending as well, if they're looking to buy something, and we see that every other day, people coming to us, buying properties across high tension wires can be really catastrophic, because that essentially means a lot of lenders will not give you the lending. They will just reject the loan if the high tension wires are close by, because they think it's very risky for the property, which is true in some cases. So a rule of thumb that we have figured out is that from the boundary of your property, the closest high tension pole should at least be 5 meters away. So once that is the case, you can go back to your lender and say, I've liked this property, but the pole is like 6-7 meters away. Will you be able to give me the loan on that? And that's what we do when we work with the brokers, because we work with very experienced brokers. So we know what to check for and how to avoid these kind of scenarios. But if you're doing it for yourself, make sure don't buy with a pole which is less than 5 or 6 meters close to your boundary of your particular property that you're looking to buy. Another important thing is some items that we did not cover today because of time as well, and some legality as well, because I can't talk on legal issues, but that they are more around the property you're buying. You need to also check for covenants. Covenants means any kind of restriction or any kind of limitation that you can do this, you cannot do that. Any kind of easements on the property. Easements can be any water pipes passing through the property underground, which potentially may prevent you to build on top of it because you can't do the digging, right? So dial before you dig is a very important resource. You can give them a call and ask them if there are any easements, or your conveyancer who's looking after the contractual side of things can look into the contract and tell you. They can do a title search for the property, and they can also tell you if there is any easement or other kind of covenant on the property. Now, restrictions can be very funny. We were buying one property, and there was a scenario in this particular case where this property we were buying for our investor buyer. It was interstate, and it had a very specific restriction which actually was a permission that the future buyer was to give to a telecom operator, that the telecom operator had their equipment installed in the neighboring house, but the access to that equipment was only possible from the property that we were buying. So that's where access to that particular property meant that the driveway for our buyer's property could be accessible by the telecom operator 24/7 at any time, and they could not block the driveway at all. And what that meant was that they can come in, they can break the fence, go on the other side, do the repair work on the telecom tower, and can go back. Of course, they like contractually they were the ones liable for that fence repair. They would do the fence repair at their own cost. But just imagine the amount of hassle, because our conveyancer picked that problem in the contract, and that's why we rejected that property. Because essentially what that meant was that our buyer, once they rented out that property, it was a big hassle for the tenant, because anytime a telecom wagon can just come in and they can just bypass, they can just cut through the fence, go on to the other side, repair the tower for any maintenance or any shutdown or whatever, and then just go back and repair the fence again. It's a big hassle for the tenants. So because of this one particular reason, we just rejected that property. So you can imagine there can be so many different reasons for you to reject properties, and that's why you are only left with a select few properties which work well for you as long-term buys, and which will not give you that headaches, and will be a really good peace of mind for you in the longer run. So again, you can have shared fences as per the contract, as I just told you in this example. Airport noise is also important. So if you're buying not necessarily close to the airport, but your property may be under the flight path as well. So for that, what you need to do is you go to the local airport website, and they have flight paths which tell you the noise levels. Usually if the noise level is less than 60 dB, that is kind of okay, because that will not really interrupt the communication of two people who are talking inside a room if the airplane is flying overhead. So 60 dB or less of a noise means that that kind of noise will not interrupt a communication or chat between two people sitting in a room talking to each other if the door is closed. So that is kind of acceptable level of noise interference. So make sure that the property you are buying should be in the area or in a noise zone where the noise levels are less than 60 dB as per that airport's website for the noise levels. So be very clear on that, because if you don't take care of that, suddenly you may buy a property which may tick all other boxes, but it may have 70, 80, 90 dB of noise factor, which will make it very, very difficult for your future tenants to rent it out. And you will keep having tenants moving out of the property because of that noise, because you can't stop the aircrafts, right? So just be very careful with that. If you're buying a unit or a townhouse, again, we don't advocate that for people, but if you're really into buying units or townhouses, make sure you're doing extra checks. You're looking at strata reports. You're looking at the last AGM minutes, which happen once every year. You're looking at the sinking fund. You're looking at the funding position as to how much money Strata has. They need to have enough money so that they can do regular maintenance, whether any future maintenance is coming up or not, whether any future capital works are coming or not. That is all mentioned in the AGM report. So make sure you review the Strata, you review the AGM report, and a lot of times a good solicitor or conveyancer is the one who can review it for you, right? So make sure you engage the right solicitor in that case as well. That is absolutely important. Okay, so deal of the week. These are all the things I want to discuss with you. So last week we talked about how you can find the high growth suburb. Please jump on the link in the comments and check that video out if you're looking to buy something for yourself. And then this particular webinar today talks about how you can find the right property in that particular target suburb. So these are two different things. You always find the suburb first, and then you find the right property. Just like this particular deal, which we got for our Sydney-based client. And this is an amazing deal which we bought in Queensland, Mackay region, again, a very growing region, getting a lot of jobs, getting a lot of population growth as well, not enough housing, really falling back in terms of supply. The demand is really high, which keeps pushing the prices higher and will continue to happen in the right suburbs for the next few years. And that is where we are expecting good growth. So we bought this house. It's like 11, 12 years old. So still has some really good tax benefits. And this is for 562 grand. And easily this will be 650 grand in 1 year from now, or maybe more. So 650 is a very conservative estimate. I believe it will be more than that by the end of next year. So this is the deal of the week, guys. If you want to have a chat further, if you want to connect, if you want to understand of how we are doing it, if you want any kind of help, feel free to reach out. If you want to discuss your personal situation, your personal portfolio strategy, or you're stuck anywhere, you need some kind of advice, feel free to jump onto this QR code, book in a session with myself. I would love to take questions for you. I cannot see any questions over here on the platform. I'm not too sure if it's a glitch or we haven't received any questions, but I'm sure we would have got some questions. So I will look into them, and definitely we will be answering your questions next week. Until then, take care. Have a very good night.